up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about DeAndre Ayton and the Phoenix Suns. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it. Check out my socials at the top of the screen as well, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, there have been some reports about DeAndre Ayton and the Phoenix Suns and them trying to work out a new contract for him, a contract extension. Ayton obviously played much better last year than he had at any point in the first couple of years of his NBA career, which brought up the question, hey, it's time to pay the guy. And it's interesting because there's a lot of context here, not just the Ayton situation specifically, but to the Suns as a whole, the fellow draft class members that have already gotten big contracts from that same draft class as Ayton, as well as the willingness of these other teams around the NBA, specifically in the Western Conference, to step up and pay big money to continue to be contenders, and some of the questions that come with that, with Phoenix being as committed to spending that kind of money as some of these other teams. So let's get to Phoenix specifically, and then we'll kind of move along from there. So obviously, this time last year, DeAndre Ayton was not someone that was in a position to ask for a max contract rookie extension. He really proved himself specifically in the postseason this year. In that first round against the Lakers specifically, I mean, he had a stretch there in the playoffs where he just showed up and averaged 20 and 10. Good defense as well, and really is the only reliable five-man they could put out there for any stretch of time in the postseason. So not only the skill set that he showed, but also how critical he is to the rotation of the Suns team. All that was very, very apparent last year. When you look around at some of his fellow draft class members from that 2018 draft, you see a lot of guys getting rookie max extensions. You see Trae Young and Luka Doncic, who've both already made All-NBA teams or All-Star teams, or both, getting the super max version of a rookie extension, which I believe is 207 or 217. And then you see Michael Porter Jr. this past week signing a $172 million rookie extension that could go up to over $200 million if he makes an All-NBA team this upcoming season. You start to look at guys like SGA as well that got a max, other players within this class that are probably ultimately going to get one, and DeAndre Ayton's looking around like, hey, I'm the number one pick. I am a very valuable part of a team that just made the finals, and I'm still young, and everybody else in this class is getting a max, and he wants one as well. The problem is, it doesn't appear as though Phoenix is willing at the moment to give DeAndre Ayton a max contract, which is interesting because this is just how things work now. If you're a highly drafted player and you've shown to be like a borderline all-star caliber guy or an all-star caliber guy, which I think you could argue in the postseason last year, that's what DeAndre Ayton looked like. You're getting a max contract. This is how it is. Go around and look at Brandon Ingram, Ben Simmons. The exception here that I can think of off the top of my head would be Jaylen Brown, who didn't get a full max, but he also wasn't the kind of player a couple years ago when he signed the new contract a year and a half ago that he was this past season. If he was up for an extension right now, he would be getting a max. It's just how these things work. You pay them not only for how they've played, but also for the potential that they've shown. And I don't think it's a difficult argument to make that DeAndre Ayton deserves a max contract. However, I don't necessarily blame Phoenix for being a little bit hesitant to offer him that because of the position that he plays. It's very, very well known at this point that if you're looking for a position in the NBA where you can get value on smaller contracts for cheaper players, it is at the 5 spot. You can sign a guy for $5 million a year that can go out there and roll to the rim and block shots and defend pick and rolls, and they'll do an average job of it. It's much more difficult to find a guy for $5 million a year that can be an offensive hub and create everything for you on the perimeter like you're asking these guys to that are SGA, that are Trae Young, Luka Doncic. Signing these max rookie extensions, it's easier to find centers that can do 70% of what DeAndre Ayton can do at much cheaper than it is to find a guard that can do 70% of what Luka Doncic can do at much cheaper. It's basically impossible to do that. And so it makes sense that Phoenix is looking at this situation saying, yes, we understand relative to the other members of your draft class that are getting these max contracts, you probably do deserve this, but is it a good investment for us given the position that you play? A couple of years from now, is DeAndre Ayton going to be providing $35 million worth of value to a Suns team after Chris Paul is gone? You have to sign this guy to a 5-year extension, and is it only worth that number if you're competing? And if Chris Paul is gone and retired, are you still going to be competing? Lots of questions there. The interesting part of this, though, is Phoenix seems to be the only team with reservations about committing long-term financially to the core that they have which is especially surprising given that they just made the finals. When you look at Utah, who signed Rudy Gobert to a contract that is going to be worth significantly more than what DeAndre Ayton will be over the next couple of seasons. They've got Donovan Mitchell on a rookie max. They've got Ingles. They've got Bogdanovich. They've got a handful of other, Mike Conley. They've committed financially in a really strong way to 4 or 5 different players to try and be a contending team. And they really didn't hesitate with it at all. They were really pretty aggressive about re-signing Rudy Gobert. You can talk about whether that's the correct decision or not, but they showed that willingness to. And then more recently, again, we talked about Michael Porter Jr. You look at Denver. I talked about this in a video with him the other day, between Jokic and Murray and Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr., they are putting up like $160 million in payroll for the next couple of seasons because they know they have a legitimate chance to compete. Phoenix, at least as of right now, those contract negotiations with DeAndre Ayton have stalled out because they don't appear to be as willing to commit financially long-term. Now, there's 2 reasons for this, I think. One is the one that people are going to jump to, and that is the history of Robert Sarver as the Phoenix Suns owner being a little bit on the cheaper side when it comes to player salaries and committing a ton of money to a team. Everybody wants to compete. It's really nice when you get to compete, but then all of a sudden when you have to start re-signing all your really good players to compete year after year, some owners get a little bit more hesitant than others. And I think Robert Sarver over the years has shown a history of, and putting it nicely, being hesitant about committing a large amount financially to putting together a really good contending team for years and years. However, I don't really think that's the main factor behind this. I think what it comes down to is the positional stuff, but also Phoenix made the finals. They're like, hey, that's awesome. They have no idea if they're going to continue to be a finals contending team. And if Chris Paul starts to fall off, they're going to be looking at a situation where they're paying Paul and Booker, Ayton, Bridges, who's going to need a new extension, a ton of money, and they might just be like a 6th seed in the Western Conference. So there's not as much longevity here when it comes to them being competitors and contenders over the next couple of seasons as there is for a team like Denver, where all 4 of the guys they've signed long-term are like 25, 26, 27 or younger. So it's much easier to track that, whereas for Phoenix, they need Chris Paul to continue to be what he was last year, to continue to be a contending team, and there's just a lot of question marks with that. Now, ultimately, the report is that extension talks between the 2 sides have stalled, and the important date here is October 18th. That is the rookie contract extension deadline. Once that day passes, DeAndre Ayton will be a restricted free agent this upcoming offseason. Now, granted, I, as of today, have every expectation that DeAndre Ayton is going to be returning to Phoenix on some kind of extension. There's no way he's going to leave. There's no way they're going to trade him. I don't think there's any possibility of anything super dramatic here. I just think it's an interesting situation to look at when you look at their competitors within their own conference and their willingness to commit financially. Of course, we know the Lakers and Clippers are very, very committed financially. We talked about Utah and Denver. Obviously, Dallas committed to Luka Doncic. And I think it's a really, really interesting question to pose, where if you were in charge in Phoenix and you had the option to just give DeAndre Ayton the 5-year max that he's obviously looking for, or slow play it and try and save some money, or if you just don't think DeAndre Ayton is a guy that's worth a max contract in general, or just a very, very large contract. Again, especially when you consider the fact that Mikal Bridges is going to need a new contract soon as well. I don't blame you if you're skeptical about DeAndre Ayton's production moving forward as a 5-man, because a lot of it is predicated off of other players setting him up. Chris Paul, Devin Booker. It's not like he's generating a lot of individual offense like someone like Joel Embiid does in Philadelphia. And yeah, he's had the last 9 months or so of his career, but the first 2 years were a little bit up and down. There was some suspension issues. He was really bad defensively, and he figured it all out last year, especially in the postseason. But that is a lot of money to commit to a player that has really only shown you being worth that much money for what is a relatively small piece of his NBA career to this point. But ultimately, how these things go is you just bank on the potential. That's how we end up with some bad contracts sometimes, is because you look at Andrew Wiggins, you're like, hey, he's averaging 23 a game. He's going to be awesome the next couple of years. Let's sign him to the max. And then he doesn't develop anymore, and the potential that you were paying for never materializes, and he's still a good player, but he's not worth the contract that you paid him. And I think that's the concern with DeAndre Ayton. I'm not concerned at all that he's going to ultimately end up leaving, but I do think it's an interesting situation to look at when you put all of the context together and say, hey, if I put you in charge, are you offering DeAndre Ayton a max contract? For me personally, I probably would, just because ultimately I feel like that's the decision you're going to come to anyway, and I don't want this like hanging over the team. I don't want any kind of discontent on a team that I think can make the finals again this season. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're all ready to go, we're all focusing on winning the title this year, making the finals this year, rather than what DeAndre Ayton's contract status is. So I probably would, just because there's an inevitability there, and maybe I save a couple $1,000,000, but in the grand scheme of things in the NBA, I know that sounds like a ridiculous statement, but in the grand scheme of things in the NBA, if you sign DeAndre Ayton to a $160 million extension rather than 172, when you're already so far over the cap, it's pretty negligible. So that's just where I'm at, but I'm interested to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section below. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Leave a like rating on this one as well if you enjoyed it. With all those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.